Chapter 36 introduces us to yet another use of the subjunctive, and this time it is what are called jussive noun clauses. If you remember back to when we first started talking about the subjunctive, we had the idea of jussive subjunctives. It was one of the independent uses of the subjunctive. And a jussive subjunctive was kind of commanding you to do something. May you do this. Let it be that this happens. And very similarly, these are going to be commands in their own way, but they're indirect commands, and you'll see how they work out as we sort of talk about them. The other part of this chapter is going off of our theme of irregular verbs, is we're going to talk about this verb theo, which is a weird hybrid between its own things that it does and the verb facio. So without sort of delaying anymore, let's just get into it. So jussive noun clauses. Okay, what is a jussive noun clause? It's a subordinate clause that expresses an indirect command. So we already had indirect commands. This is just another use and another way of expressing a command, and we could say something like, he ordered them to do this, and that to do this is going to be, could be, a jussive noun clause. The reason why they're called jussive noun clauses is there's a command, it's in the subjunctive, like a jussive subjunctive, and there's always going to be a noun before it, right? You can't say, even if it's he commanded himself. In our example here, he ordered them. That word them is a noun in Latin, and you're going to see that. And some of the command, verbs that will introduce these are going to take a particular case. Sometimes it's accusative, which you would expect, or sometimes it'll be dative, just like we had with our special datives. Like I just said, the main clause in these jussive noun constructions will have some kind of command verb, and I'll show you a bunch of the common ones here in a second, but you're going to expect some kind of command verb, okay? How are you going to recognize it? If you see a command verb, the next thing to look for would be a subjunctive clause, a subordinate subjunctive clause that's introduced by ut for positives or ne for negatives, commanding someone not to do something, and stating a kind of command indirectly. Okay, the verb, the subjunctive verb, is usually present or imperfect. Usually, like most of the time. Painting with a broad brush, that would be what to expect. Okay, and as you see in our example, he ordered them to do this. In English, we just use an infinitive with no introductory word. You don't have to translate the ut so that, or something like that, or unless they with the ne, and there's no auxiliary such as may or might, which we saw with other subjunctive clauses. So jussive noun clauses, not going to use them. Okay, and here are just some examples. Okay, imperat vobis ut hoc faciatis. He commands you all to do this. And if you see there, we don't translate the ut really. The reason why and the way you can kind of tell that this is a jussive noun clause is you have imperat, which is a commanding verb. It literally is the verb to command. And then you have vobis, which impero is going to take a dative, and so that's why it's a noun part. There's that noun there. He commands them. You would usually think, oh, he's commanding someone in the accusative. Well, in this case, it's dative. And then you have ut, and then you have a verb in the subjunctive. In this case, it's present subjunctive. Facio, we fear a liar. Ia, and that's why it's faciatis. Okay. Moving on to persuadet. Eis ut hoc faciant. So, again, just, he persuades them. Eis, just like we saw, persuadeo is going to take the dative to do this. And again, we don't translate the ut. We use an infinitive to do this. And, this is, you may be tempted to say something like, he persuades them so that they, may do this or they might do this, right? It's really just recognizing, hey, this is another way of expressing a command. And to resist that temptation and translate it as a command instead, because persuadeo, you have a subjunctive. Putting that together, this is really what they're trying to get at. It's more forceful than a regular subjunctive, showing hypothetical, right? He persuades them to do this. And then last one here, petitwit ab eis nec hoc facerent. So I gave you two present examples. Here's an imperfect subjunctive example, but he begged from them, or he just begged them. Latin was going to say something like he begged from them, but we wouldn't say that. We would just say he begged them not to do this. And again, it's just use the word not and then translate it like the other ones. So some simple examples, but it doesn't need to be more complicated than that. And I know you're going to think, well, every sentence you'll translate will be more complicated than that. I get it, but this is breaking it down to its minimal parts, right? A command verb, an ut or a ne, subjunctive, subordinate clause, present or imperfect generally. Going on, here are just some common verbs that are going to introduce jussive noun clauses. Okay, you have hortor, you have impero, moneo, oro, persuadeo, pedo, quairo, rogo, and sometimes, not always, wolo, nolo, and malo. Sometimes, and they'll do that, and other times they're just going to use an infinitive instead. So that's sort of every once in a while, sort of thing. Obviously, all of these verbs can be used in other ways. They don't have to be jussive noun clauses. But if you see one of these verbs and then you see an ut or you see a ne, maybe be thinking, hey, maybe this is an indirect command. Maybe this is one of these jussive noun clauses that we're talking about. Okay, and then really the last thing in this chapter, there's really not a lot else to say about jussive nouns, is this verb fio. And so it's fio, fieri, like Guy Fieri, factus sum. Okay, and if you can see right now, fio, that's okay as an O ending. That's pretty normal. That's an active one, like amo even as an O. But then we have that fieri, E-R-I, and you're like, that's passive. And then factus sum, like, oh, that's definitely passive. So going back to talking about like those deponent verbs, like this is kind of like semi-deponent, and then also, we have an active form, and then we have passives, and then a factus sum. You're like, oh, that looks exactly like facio, and you would be correct. So this verb means to occur, to happen, for something to be done or to be made. So it has, in some ways, an active translation and also a passive translation. I'm really sorry, but that's the way that this verb works. It's a common verb. Like Romans use it a lot. And really, the main place that they used it was to replace the passive forms of the verb facio in the present system. So in the present, the imperfect, and future. Instead of using facio, which means to do or make, but then obviously the passive would be to be done or to be made, they just use this verb fio, which by itself means to be done or to be made or to occur, to happen. It will have active endings in the present, the imperfect, and future. So the Romans just, in this way, I don't know if English teachers still tell you to do this, but to avoid the passive voice, this is a Roman example of avoiding the passive voice. Instead of using facio, they replaced it with fio. Okay. The issue, though, is that because it really sort of became this stand-in for, it was an active way of expressing facio passively, it lacks a perfect system. So the perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect. So if it was in some way helping out facio, the Romans, in their infinite wisdom, said, okay, well, we'll just use the perfect passive system of facio to express fio in the perfect. Now, another way of thinking about it is maybe fio doesn't have a perfect, and facio just has this extra meaning of to happen or occur in its passive forms. However you want to think about it, there in the perfect passives, rather. Okay, that might make it more confusing than it needs to be, but that's really what's happening. Is this is just a verb that exists solely to enhance or in some way modify and support Faccio. It's really all it is. And so there's some give and take here between the forms. But when translating, if you see the present system of Fio, so present, imperfect, or future, just remember that you have those passive options of to be done or to be made, to occur or to happen as well, but it's going to be passive, right? You're going to see active endings, but it's really a passive verb there. And then when you're translating the passive perfect system of Faccio, which factus est, factus erat, factus ero, ericerit, whatever one it is, just remember that you have options there of not just to be made or to be accomplished, but you can also have the idea of what Fio is, to become or to have occurred or to be made, right? And so you have those options there with Fio because there's this play between them, okay? Now the last part here is just to see the irregular forms of Fio. And really we're going to talk about the present, the imperfect, and future, indicative, and then the present and imperfect subjunctive is really all that you're going to see here. All the other forms are regular because in the perfect system, it's just Faccio's perfect passive system, and that's fine, right? That's completely regular. You should already know it. It's factus plus your forms of to be, present, and perfect future. So that's not too bad. The perfect subjunctive and the pluperfect subjunctive, again, those would just be the passive forms. Nothing, factus simsi sit or factus esse set. Nothing too bad there. So it's really just in these forms. The nice thing is that they're kind of modeled in like a fourth conjugation sort of feel, like audio, audire, or a third io. You could think of it like capio, capere, and that's going to make it a little bit more sense. But here's Fio in the present. So nothing too crazy here. It'd be like a third io or a fourth. Fio, fis, fit, fimus, fitis, fiunt. And so if you think of like audio is audio, audis, audit, audimus, auditus, audiunt. Kind of regular there. I'd still write them down just so you have them for your reference when you're seeing them, but Fio, so I occur or you occur or he, she, or it occurs. Kind of a weird one there. A lot of times it'll be that it occurs or they these things occurred or something like that, or happened is what you're going to see. A lot of it's going to be third or fourth person, not or third person singular plural, not fourth person, not there. First and seconds you won't see as much, but here's it in the present. If you think back to audio in the imperfect, it was that like IE and then bombas bot, is bot. That's what we have with Fio here. So fie bom, fie bos, fie bot, fie bomus, fie batis, fie bot. It's really just those third IO or those fourth endings with an F in front of them, right? So pretty easy there. Ie bom, bos bot, bomus batis bot. Kind of what you would expect for the imperfect. The future, like a third IO or a fourth, isn't going to use bo bis bit. It's going to use a set, amus, atis, ent, and that's exactly what we have here. So fiam, fies, fiet, fiemus, fietis, fient. Nothing too crazy there. Just kind of what you would expect out of a third IO or a fourth. But because Fio, and you can't really judge that based on the verb, especially with that passive infinitive, it becomes kind of irregular, and so that's why we're covering it. In the present, in subjunctive, okay, it's a third IO or a fourth, which have an IA change. So instead of is, it, imus, itis, iunt, you're going to have an IA. So fion, yes, it looks exactly like the future form there, but that's something we've already talked about. That happens with these verbs. But instead of fis, fias, fiat, fiamus, fiatus, fiant. And you could sort of see this is a very sort of Italian sounding verb, fiat, like the car company, as well. So we fear a liar, IA. That's what you would totally expect. And then the last one is the imperfect subjunctive. Remember, it's always the infinitive plus an ending. It's fierem instead of fieri, like an I there. I know it's fieri, Fieri, for your infinitive. But here it switches from passive to active, which follows a model like audio as well, but would still be translated with that to happen, occur, anything like that. Fiorem, fieres, fioret, fioremus, fioretis, fiorent. Okay, and then the last little chart here are just your imperatives. So if you want to say for something to happen, be made, fee. If you want a bunch of people command them to do it, fite. Kind of what you'd expect in a way. Fieri, get rid of the er, I. That's your verb stem, and then add a te. Nothing really different there than what you would usually expect, but that's fio. And then just here's some examples of, hoc facit. That would be, he is doing this, right? You can still say hoc, but if it was hoc fit, you wouldn't say he is being done. It's just this is done. It ends up being nominative. Hoc faciat, let him do this. Whereas hoc fiat says let this be done. So you get that idea of it's passive, where, facio generally is active. Let him do this. Let it be done. Right? And then the last one here, dicunt hoc fieri. They say that this is being done or that this is happening. So again, it's really just kind of complementing the forms of facio. It's a passive verb that's used. It's active. The Romans generally like to use active instead of passive. So facio is a very common verb. How do they solve the problem of constantly using passives for this idea of happening or occurring? Well, they just have this verb that sort of fits the mold to help, and you could see it's modeled off of it, and endings are kind of the same, and it's a shortened form in a lot of ways of facio. Okay, so really just be aware of it as we're going through translations and working through stuff. It's another verb just to sort of push in as, hey, it's irregular, and just be aware of it. It's common. You're going to see it a lot. Make sure that you know how to translate it. Jussive noun clauses, again, remember you're going to see one of those command verbs most of the time with a noun, and then ut, and then subjunctive, usually present or imperfect. Again, nothing new as far as grammar goes, just another use and another configuration of things so that you're aware of them as we're moving forward with translations.